Are you worried about all these visa changes coming to Australia in 2024? In today's video, I'm going to guide you through an article that has been released by SBS News. The article was written by Emma Brancadisano on the 1st of January 2024 about all the key upcoming changes that you need to be aware about as somebody who is looking to apply for a visa in Australia. And I'm also going to share some of my thoughts about what I think about some of these changes. So stick with me until the end to get my full insight and also for you to think about what is it that you can do to improve your opportunities with gaining a successful visa this year and beyond. The title is From Language Test to Age Limits, the Key Australian Visa Changes for 2024. In late 2023, the government unveiled its strategy to reform the migration system with some changes expected to take effect this year. Here's what you need to know. So the article then goes into towards the end of 2023, the Albanese government unveiled its long-awaited strategy to reform the country's migration system. There are some significant changes set for the new year. And this is what you need to know from an international student perspective point of view. Released by Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neil in early December, the strategy included a range of new commitments focused largely on temporary skilled migration and international education. The government plans to implement many of these changes through 2024, including stricter English language requirements for students and temporary graduate visas, as well as the new visa for those with in-demand skills. A raft of previous announcements are also set to come into effect this year, for example, a new visa for Pacific migrants. The government has outlined areas for future reform, including permanent skilled migration, regional migration, and the Working Holiday Maker program, which will be consulted on through 2024. So what that means is that there are still reforms coming with some of the old visas that they're looking to change in the near future. Now, at this stage, we don't know if there's any specific benefits to those changes in those visas or not, but time will tell. So here's what we know so far. What is the government hoping to achieve with its migration strategy? Net overseas migration is the total number of people who have entered and remained in the country for at least 1 year, minus those who have left. Net overseas migration includes the movements in and out of Australia's citizens. So what that means is, for example, if you have 10 people coming into the country and only 5 leave, so you've still got 5 more additional people that are still within the country. And if you do that over a certain period of time, you're going to end up with way more people than what you actually intended for. Australia's NOM peaked in 2022-23 at 510,000, according to projections also contained in the government's mid-year budget update. The spike was largely due to the return of international students and tourists after the easing of COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. So that was expected that these numbers would go up. The government has stressed that NOM isn't an immigration policy target, but the new strategy aims to reduce the figure from 510,000 to the near pre-pandemic level of 375,000 in 2023-24 financial year, and then to 250,000 in 2024-2025. So what that means is that it's going to be more challenging to obtain a visa for studies in the next 2 years. The crazy thing here is that many years ago, there was a strategy from 2020 to 2025 to actually look at increasing international student numbers to 1 million in Australia. And this is now going to look like it's going to be a quarter of that based around 2025. So the government has really gone backwards here in Australia based around international student numbers. There used to be a lot of talk about how Australia could help India, for example, because there was not enough institutions in India to help in building the skills needed for the country. And the option was to bring more Indian students into Australia to upskill the Indian nationals, and then they could go home and use those skills back home. But based around that strategy from 5, 6 years ago to now, it has totally changed. Our goal is to return migration to sustainable levels, O'Neill told reporters in early December. Lee Perkins, an accredited immigration law specialist at Carina Ford Lawyers, said the strategy attempts to address issues with the migration system in a long-term and meaningful way. She said one of the overarching issues is to reduce permanent temporariness, a state in which people live in Australia on temporary visas and hop from visa to remain in the country. So that's from, for example, going from a student visa to a bridging visa. There are going to be a number of clients in Australia who will get caught out who are currently on COVID visas, and they may not have completed their studies. And because they haven't done that, they're going to find themselves into a little bit of trouble for not completing their course in the first place, which I've strongly suggested to all students. When you're looking to transfer visas, always make sure that you complete any course that you do, because that's going to be looked at in the future by the Australian government. And the other part to that as well has been where students coming to the country to undertake a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, and then they attempt to jump down to a vocational course or an English course. So these are things that the Australian government is looking to stop in the future. Broadly, this strategy is trying to decrease the amount of long-term temporary visa holders and increase pathways to permanent residency, which I think will have a positive impact on social cohesion, she said. I'm hopeful the strategy will provide ultimately better skilled migration, an increase in permanent migration over temporary migration, as well as cracking down on the exploitation of migrants, which has become an increasing issue, especially over COVID. The changes were broadly supported by unions and business groups as being crucial to improving working conditions and boosting the economy. New visa for workers with in-demand skills. Perkins said the biggest change coming is the employer-sponsored visas. The government is introducing a new 4-year temporary skilled worker visa, which it says will offer workers more opportunity to change their employer and provide pathway to permanent residency. Once implemented, the Skills in Demand visa will replace the current temporary skill shortage visa, subclass 482, which permits holders to live in Australia while working full-time for a sponsoring employer. According to the government timeline of new and existing commitments, this will happen in late 2024. So when we talk about late 2024, we could assume that this will be probably closer somewhere around November this year. The visa will be split into 3 pathways, the first being a specialist skills pathway that expedites applications from highly skilled migrants. So those that come under the highly skilled migrants will be the ones that will be pushed first into future permanent residency. This will be available to those initially earning at least 135,000 in any job, excluding trades workers, machinery operators, drivers, and laborers. So what you're looking at here is what we call white collar workers, people that work in a office environment or maybe doctors and things like that, not so much the tradespeople. Now, 135,000 Australian is quite a lot. You got to think about that the standard wage at the moment is probably about 70 or 80,000 Australian. So you really need to have some high skills or high qualifications in that field to be able to be eligible for that. The government has committed to a medium visa processing time of 7 days. Well, that is fantastic news. 7-day turnaround is unbelievable if that can happen. Perkins commented efforts to make employer sponsorship more accessible and to provide more options for permanent residency. She said faster processing times would be attractive to highly skilled workers. In comparison to the rest of the world, we may lose skilled workers just because of how complex and lengthy our employer-sponsored program is, she said. And that's very true. It does take a long time for employers to be able to organize all the documentation and paperwork to be able to sponsor an employee to stay in their job in Australia at the moment. The second core skills pathway will be available to most temporary skills migrants whose job is listed on a new core skills occupation list based on those identified by Jobs and Skilled Australia as being in short supply. So this is going to be replacing the old skills occupation list. And this will be the new one where you can identify where the skill shortages are for specific jobs. Their earnings will need to be at least the income required for a temporary skilled migration income threshold. Early in 2023, the government raised the TISMIT from 53,900 to 70,000. So as you can see here, your average income needs to be about 70,000, but in order to be a highly skilled migrant, you need to be earning at least 135,000. So you can see that there's almost double in that. The government will also move to index this threshold annually by the wage price index. So what they're saying here is that this could go up or down depending on inflation. So for example, this year that could be 70,000. Next year it could be $71,250 based on the index. Consultation on regulating migration for lower paid workers with essential skills, a third pathway, is expected to begin in the first half of 2024. So this is probably a pathway where you might have people who are interested in trades to come through and lower skilled occupations, for example, specific service-based industries, maybe hospitality or those kind of things. Harder English language tests and other changes to student visas. International students and graduates, who, according to the migration strategy, make up the largest share of Australia's permanent temporary migrants, are a big focus on government reforms. Broadly speaking, the government was trying to increase the skill level of students who are coming here, Perkins said. If someone looks like they're not going to have a permanent pathway, they're almost trying to discourage them from coming to Australia to study. So what they're saying here is students have low skill levels and are not able to meet the demand for jobs in Australia. These are the students that are going to be discouraged in the future. So you really need to think about how are you going to plan your career moving forward. Among other changes are raised English language requirements. From early this year, those applying for a student visa will need an International English Language Testing System or IELTS score of 6, up from 5.5, or an equivalent test of English language proficiency, such as the Pearson Test of English, or PTE for short, which is becoming more popular amongst international students choosing Australia as their education destination. The test score required for a temporary graduate visa will increase from 6 to 6.5. The government says this will improve the quality of students' educational experience and reduce potential workplace exploitation. Now, I have a separate video on this, which I'll link at the end of this video that you can have a look at, that breaks down all the different English language requirements and what is it that you can do in order to improve your English as well. A new genuine student test. Australia's new migration strategy will also introduce a new genuine student test for all international students that will replace the existing genuine temporary entrant requirement. This will incentivize applications from genuine students and discourage non-genuine students whose primary intention is to work rather than study, the strategy states. This is expected to be implemented in early 2024. The government moved to bolster the Student Visa Integrity Unit in the Home Affairs Department late last year, and will pursue measures to remove unscrupulous providers from the system in 2024. So at the moment, there is the statement test that you would complete for the genuine temporary entrant requirements. That will at some point be replaced with the genuine student test. We're still not sure what's in it or what it looks like, but keep an eye on this channel and make sure you subscribe so that way when these changes come in, I can share them with you. And the other thing here as well is the government will be looking to shut down a number of schools. At this stage, we would say that the focus will be on vocational education and training. So if you're looking to study in 2024, I strongly suggest that if you are interested in vocational education and training, that you apply through a TAFE college, or to be on the safe side, you're better off to either apply for a bachelor's degree or postgraduate study, at least for the next 2 years, if you want to be successful with a student visa. Student visa processing priorities. The government has released new processing priorities for student and student guardian visa applications based on its commitment to scrutinize those from high-risk providers. These are outlined in a ministerial direction based on a rated system for education providers and applies to all applications lodged on or from the 15th of December. So at the moment, if you have a application sitting in the system, it'll come down to which provider you've applied to or which institution you've applied to. And if that is on the government's radar, chances are that you may not get a successful student visa because of the institution that you've applied with. So you need to check the organization or the institutions that you've applied with. Very important. More changes to temporary graduate visas. From mid-2024, the government will move to strengthen and simplify temporary graduate visas. The change will include an age limit for visa applications. Under the new settings, applications will need to be under the age of 35, down from the current age of 50. Now, I have a separate video on this that you can have a look at as well. A reduced visa duration. The duration of initial temporary graduate visas will also be reduced to 2 years for a bachelor's or master's degree by coursework and 3 years for a master's by research. Students in regional areas will be eligible for a second visa of 1 to 2 years depending upon their location. This is all part of reducing long-term temporary visa holders, Perkins explained. So in one of my previous videos, I talk about the breakdown of the age limits and I talk about the reduction of the visa duration. But it's really important to note that this is still not set in concrete, and there are a number of universities that are lobbying because of this age, because it can impact students that are looking to undertake masters by research and also PhDs by research as well. Generally, a student would be older than that when they're looking to undertake these kind of programs. So the government still may make some changes in that law where it could potentially be where those students are exempt if they are undertaking a master's by research or a PhD by research. So what has the government already announced? So they've phased out the COVID concessions. So in September 2023, the government announced it would be phasing out the pandemic event visa, which was created in 2020 to enable temporary visa holders to remain in Australia during the COVID-19 pandemic when international borders were closed. No new applicants were eligible for the visa from the 2nd of September, and applications will close entirely from February. This strategy states phasing out COVID concessions, including discontinuing the pandemic event visa and uncapped working hours for international students, will help bring migration numbers to near pre-pandemic levels. So prior to the 1st of July, international students were able to work up to 40 hours a week, and then that was changed back to 24 hours a week because of the changes with the COVID visas. New visa for Pacific migrants. A new visa for eligible migrants from Pacific countries and Timor-Leste is also set to be introduced this year. The Pacific Engagement Visa will enable up to 3,000 nationals from participating countries to migrate to Australia each year as permanent residents. Now, that kind of is a bit contradictory because you're talking about Pacific countries becoming permanent migrants, and yet we're trying to reduce the number of migration in the country. So if we're looking at 250,000 international student visas, and then all of a sudden you've got that 3,000 from permanent residents coming in from Pacific countries, the question is, will that reduce the number of international students that could get a visa, or is this on top of that? So that's a question that hasn't been answered yet. Legislation passed by the Senate in October will allow the use of a ballot process to randomly select applicants. So it's going to be like a lottery system, similar to what they have in the US for like a green card. If successful, they would then be required to satisfy certain criteria, including having a job in Australia. In the statement issued in October last year, Minister for Immigration Andrew Giles and Minister for International Development and the Pacific Pat Conroy said the program would commence in 2024 once all remaining legislative and administrative arrangements are approved. So this still could take some time before it comes into action. Priority processing for protection visa applicants. In October, the government also announced a $160 million package to help strengthen the refugee visa system after a review found it was being exploited to extend people's stay in Australia. That includes $54 million to create a real-time priority processing of protection visa applications to help break the business model of those who abuse the system. Perkins said we'll see more of this in 2024. It will become more important as we're seeing more people get processed quickly and get refusals quickly, she said. So what's happened here is some migration agents were exploiting this system, and those students or clients that were in Australia in 2023 were being pushed onto protection visas, and they were being abused by immigration agents, and a few of them have gotten themselves into trouble and have also been deregistered as migration agents as well. What will be on the migration agenda in 2024? The strategy outlines areas of future reform that requires consultation in 2024. This includes how to regulate migration for lower paid workers with essential skills and how to reshape permanent skilled migration. The government plans to look at regional migration and the Working Holiday Maker program to support the regions and its workers. A discussion paper to that end is set to be released early this year. So as those documents are released in 2024, I'll make sure to read them and share that information with you to identify what is the best option for you in 2024 and beyond. So a few questions I just wanted to ask you quickly today. What did you find most useful out of today's article? And what are your thoughts about your future when it comes to gaining a visa in Australia in 2024? Please comment below. And in the next video, I'm going to give you a full breakdown about the English requirements for your student visa in Australia. That includes why is the Australian government looking to make those changes? And what are the differences between the English tests? Which ones are accepted and which ones aren't? And what do the English scores mean and how do you interpret them? And as a bonus, I'm also going to give you some options in what you can do to improve your English before you come and study in Australia. And don't forget, if you want to have a further chat about studying in Australia, building your career, or starting a business, click on the booking link below in the description and let's have a further chat.